And Ms. Andrews, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Shumway, would you please introduce yourself?
My name is Alicia Shumway.
How are you employed?
Currently, I'm employed as a mental health clinician with Southwest Behavioral Health Agency.
In December of 2009, how were you employed?
I was employed by the state of Arizona in Child Protective Services as an investigator.
What exactly does an investigator do for Child Protective Services?
Investigators are the frontline individuals. We go out into the home once a report has been received to basically ascertain whether or not the allegations in the report are true or false, or if there's any immediate danger to the child, and thus make a decision regarding the child's placement.
How are allegations usually received by Child Protective Services?
Allegations are generally received when somebody calls into our central intake unit, which is also known as the hotline. They then make a decision based upon the information received, whether or not the information qualifies as a report. Once that has been decided if it is a report or not, it is then assigned to the specific units, field units, based upon the area code.
Let me ask you this. What do you mean by whether or not it qualifies as a report?
There are certain criteria. The intake unit, the hotline, receives a lot of calls, and there have to be a certain criteria met for them to ascertain whether or not it would just be taken as information only or as an actual report.
And once it's classified as a report, are there certain classifications about the urgency of a matter?
Yes, we have what we call priority 1 through 4. Priority 1 reports have to be responded to within 2 hours. Priority 2 reports are responded to within 48 hours. Priority 3, 72 hours, and priority 4 is within a business week.
And how long did you work at Child Protective Services before you left?
I worked at Child Protective Services for nearly 3 years.
And were you an investigator that whole time?
There was a period when budget cuts happened where I had to be reallocated to what they call an ongoing unit for about 6 months. But other than that, I was in investigations the whole time.
And when did you leave Child Protective Services?
In March of 2000, let's see, we're in 12 now, 11.
And so you've indicated you were working there in December of 2009. Did you receive a report involving a child by the name of Gabriel Johnson?
I did.
And the way you received the report, you've indicated reports come in through the hotline. Is that information you're usually permitted to disclose about how the report comes in?
In regards to the source of the report, we are not allowed to disclose that information.
So the source is information. Is it information that's provided to you?
Yes.
But it's not information you're legally allowed to disclose without some sort of court order that tells you otherwise?
Correct.
And so you received some information about a case. Who was the first person you contacted regarding Gabriel Johnson?
The first person I contacted was the father, Logan.
And what was Logan's full name?
Logan McQueary.
And do you recall what date you first contacted Logan McQueary?
I contacted him on December 11th.
And was that 2009?
Correct.
When you contacted him on December 11th, 2009, was that first contact by telephone or in person?
By telephone.
And when you talked to Logan McQueary, did you set up an appointment to meet with him at a later time?
I did.
And when was the date that you set up an appointment to meet with him?
December 14th, 2009.
Is there a reason you didn't meet with him on December 11th, 2009?
Yes.
What was that reason?
He was on his way to the family court to file for custody.
And so you met with him on December 14th, 2009. Did you talk to anybody involved in the case prior to meeting with Logan McQueary?
I did.
And who did you speak to?
I spoke with the mother, Elizabeth Johnson.
And what date did you speak with Elizabeth Johnson?
December 11th, 2009.
And on December 11, 2009, where did you talk to Elizabeth Johnson?
At her residence.
Okay, and was that a residence in Tempe, Arizona?
Yes, it was.
And when you went to the residence, what was the first thing that happened?
I arrived at the residence, knocked on the door, and introduced myself and the agency that I worked for. Elizabeth at that time was with a couple, an individual inside the home. She was selling her dog, so she asked me to stay outside until that transaction was completed.
And she told you she was meeting with them to sell her dogs?
Correct.
Prior to you arriving at Elizabeth Johnson's, did you call her to tell her you were arriving?
I did not.
Did you have a phone number to reach her?
I did.
What was the reason you just showed up without calling her?
It's standard protocol that we just kind of show up unannounced because we don't want the families to be prepared that we're coming in case they're fixing the house up or, depending on the allegations, it could be a filthy home. We don't want to give them a heads up that we're coming out so that they can hurry and clean it.
And so you arrived there. What was the purpose of arriving there that day?
I had arrived there to see the baby and to ascertain whether or not the allegations in the report were true.
And when you arrived there, you indicated that Elizabeth Johnson asked you to wait outside. Did you see the couple leave?
I did.
And did they leave with a dog?
Yes.
And how many dogs did they leave with?
At least one.
At least one. Do you recall more than one?
I don't recall more than one.
Did you, at some point, were you allowed to enter the residence?
Yes, at that point I was allowed to enter.
And when you entered the residence, who was present inside?
Just Elizabeth Johnson.
Did you see any other dogs in the residence?
I did not.
And at that point, did you have a conversation with Elizabeth Johnson about the allegations?
I did.
What was her reaction?
Her initial reaction was that she was shocked by the allegations contained in the report.
And what did she tell you in the conversation you had with her in regard to the allegations?
She had informed me the allegations were that she was leaving the child home alone, that she was unstable, and she had informed me that none of those allegations were true, that she had never left her child alone, and that she had initially stated that there hadn't been any instability in the relationship, but later recanted in my interview instead that, yes, that there was some instability and some domestic violence that had occurred.
So she first told you there was no instability in domestic violence and then later admitted that there was?
Correct.
When she admitted that there was instability in domestic violence, did she talk to you about what that was?
She, in the report itself, it had indicated an incident that she had gone to Logan's residence with a knife and had slashed the furniture or something like that. When I referred to that incident in the CPS summary in our report, she then said that it was true that she had gone and that she was that she did have some criminal charges for which she had to take, I believe, anger management classes.
And did she indicate to you whether or not Gabriel was present during that incident?
She indicated to me that he was not present at that time.
During the time that you were talking to Elizabeth, did you ask her where Gabriel was?
I did.
And what did she tell you?
She informed me that she had taken him to the Smith residence and had indicated that they were the adoptive parents.
And did she provide you the names of the Smiths?
She did, as well as a phone number.
And during the time that you were there with Elizabeth Johnson, did you attempt to contact either of the Smiths?
Not at that time.
What did Elizabeth Johnson tell you on that first meeting about the Smiths and the Smiths having Gabriel at that time?
She indicated to me that they were in the process of adopting the child, that they had a private attorney that was taking care of everything, and I believe, in her words, that everything was legal.
And did you have any conversation with her at that time about the court proceedings that were being started by Logan McQueary?
Not that I can recall.
Did you have any conversation with her other than her telling you about the adoption proceedings, about the adoption itself on this occasion?
No.
When you had contact with Elizabeth Johnson, did you indicate to her your desire to see Gabriel?
I did.
And what did she tell you about that?
She informed me that that would be okay, that she would, she had given me already the Smith's number that I could contact them because I told them that she didn't have any adoption paperwork for me to prove that the adoption had gone through, which meant for my purposes that she was still the legal guardian and therefore I needed to ascertain the safety of the child from her.
And you indicated that on you indicated on that same date you also talked to the father, correct? Logan McQueary?
December 11th.
And that was before you met with Elizabeth Johnson?
Yes.
And then did you then meet with Logan McQueary on a later date?
I did.
And what date was that?
December 14th, 2009.
And approximately what time of day was that?
Approximately 9 o'clock in the morning.
And when you met with Logan McQueary, did you meet with him in person?
I did.
And did you have some conversation with him about the allegations?
Yes.
And did you have some conversation with him about what Elizabeth Johnson had said in the previous meeting with her?
Yes.
Now, anything that Logan said to you would be hearsay, so I'm not going to ask you about anything he said to you. But during that conversation, did you discuss his concerns about Elizabeth Johnson?
Yes, I did.
Did you discuss their relationship history?
Yes, I did.
Did you discuss the whereabouts of Gabriel?
Yes.
Did you discuss the issue regarding the adoption?
Yes.
And did you discuss the pending court proceedings?
Yes.
After meeting with Logan McQueary, did you call the Smiths?
I did.
And did you actually speak with either of them?
No, at that time I left a message. It was a business line.
Okay. And after you left a message, did you receive a return call?
I did.
And who was that from?
From Mrs. Smith.
And did she identify herself to you?
Yes.
And did she tell you her first name?
Yes.
And what was that?
Tammi Smith.
What was the conversation that you had with Tammi Smith on the phone?
I had indicated to her that I needed to see the child. Previous to speaking with her, I had already spoken with Elizabeth Johnson, and Elizabeth had indicated that Gabriel would be available for me to see later that afternoon. So I had confirmed that with Tammi Smith as well, that they had arranged to have Gabriel back at Elizabeth's home so that I could go there to see him at that time.
And when you were having the conversation with Tammi Smith, did she tell you how long she had known Elizabeth Johnson?
She indicated for quite a while.
Now let me ask you this. In a case that you're the investigator, do you go back at any point in time and type up any notes about what happened in the investigation?
Yes, I do.
And on those notes, do you try and indicate as much as you can remember about what happened?
Yes.
Do those notes usually contain everything that happened in a situation?
No, they do not.
If you write notes about a case, do you ever put anything in quotation marks?
Yes.
And what would be the reason that you put something in quotation marks?
To accurately reflect the information that was provided to me.
But if you're putting information in a report, are you trying to accurately represent all of that information?
Yes.
If you were to put something in quotation marks, is that a statement someone said to you?
Yes.
And in fact, in your notes about your conversation with Tammi Smith, did you put in quotations the statement that you just said, that she said she knew Elizabeth Johnson for quite a while?
Yes, I did.
And does that indicate that's the statement she gave to you?
Correct.
During the conversation you had with Tammi Smith on the phone, what did she tell you about what she was doing with Gabriel at the time?
She indicated to me that she was simply babysitting him while Mother was looking for a job.
During that conversation at all with Tammi Smith, did she indicate that she was in the process of adopting Gabriel?
No, she did not.
And did you ask her about the adoption in that conversation?
I cannot accurately recall.
After having that conversation with Tammi Smith, did you then meet with Elizabeth Johnson, Tammi Smith, and Gabriel Johnson?
I did.
And when was that?
It was on December 14th, 2009 at approximately 1:30 in the afternoon.
And you've already talked about the notes that you took. Are there certain times that you note a time of day that you had that meeting?
Yes, when I specifically set up appointments with individuals, the time indicated as the time of the appointment that I had set with them.
And in this particular case, you noted that the time that you met with them was 1:30 p.m.?
Correct.
And to your memory, is that fairly accurate as to the time you met with them?
Yes.
At the time that you met with Elizabeth Johnson, Tammi Smith, and Gabriel Johnson, what happened when you arrived?
When I had arrived at that point in time, I was there to see the child, Gabriel, to ascertain his safety. I went into the home. He was there present, so was Tammi Smith and Elizabeth Johnson. They were both sitting there. Because I had already interviewed Elizabeth prior to that time, I didn't need to spend much time re-going over the information. I saw the baby. I ascertained that there was no immediate safety risks or danger to him, and he appeared to be well cared for at that time. And as I was preparing to leave, I had spoken with Elizabeth again in regards to her indicating in my first interview that she was giving him up for adoption, because at that point in time I had already spoken with Logan McQueary.
Let me stop you there and ask you this. You indicated that Tammi Smith and Elizabeth Johnson were both sitting there.
Yeah.
Were they sitting together with you during your entire contact with them?
Yes, we were at the kitchen table.
Okay. And where was Gabriel during this interaction?
He was in the same room. It was a trailer home, and it was kind of a great room, so he was just there as well.
Okay. Do you recall what it was that Gabriel was doing?
I don't recall specifically.
But you recall he was healthy and safe?
Yes.
Okay. And so you indicated Elizabeth Johnson and Tammi Smith were there together as you were having this conversation, and then you were talking to Elizabeth Johnson about the adoption. What happened in that conversation with Elizabeth Johnson?
When I was talking to her in regards to what she had previously informed me about the adoption, she adamantly recanted everything that she had said before. She indicated that she had never mentioned that she was putting him up for adoption, and seemed honestly dumbfounded as to how I would come up with that information. I even approached her and asked her why it was that I would have that specific information or make up that kind of story when I was there with her, and she indicated that she did not know why I was had that information, but she recanted everything and adamantly denied that there was any form of adoption that was going to be occurring.
Now, at the time that you were there meeting with Elizabeth Johnson and Tammi Smith was also there, did either of them talk to you about their concerns or provide you any allegations against Logan McQueary?
Yes.
And what information did they provide you while they were sitting there?
The information they provided me was that he had abandoned Elizabeth Johnson, that he was not providing any sort of support for her or for Gabriel.
And did you have information to the contrary?
Yes, according to the interview that I had with Logan previous to that.
And did you talk to Elizabeth Johnson and Tammi Smith about the information you had to the contrary?
Yes.
And while you were talking with Elizabeth Johnson, was there conversation with Tammi Smith about Logan McQueary or the adoption process?
Yes.
And what was Tammi Smith saying about the adoption process and Logan McQueary?
She adamantly did not like or think very favorably of Logan McQueary. In regards to the adoption process, I cannot recall exactly what she said. In fact, I'm not certain that she addressed that specifically at that time.
Well, what did Tammi Smith say or do when Elizabeth Johnson was denying that she had told you she had given the baby up for adoption?
According to my recollection, Tammi simply sat there and listened to the information that was being provided, did not try to refute any of the information Elizabeth was giving to me.
So Tammi Smith never confronted Elizabeth Johnson when she recanted her earlier statements?
No.
At some point in time during that conversation, did you have any conversation with Tammi Smith about her involvement in this situation?
Towards the end of the time when I was there with them both, I had very firmly and directly informed Elizabeth Johnson that she needed to resolve this matter through the family court proceedings, which had been initiated, and that Tammi Smith was not the custodial guardian of this child and therefore did not need to intervene in that process.
So did you essentially tell Tammi to stay out of it?
Yes, I did.
And you discussed the fact that there were actually court proceedings pending at this time?
Yes.
Did you talk to Elizabeth Johnson about how to make sure that Gabriel stayed safe and cared for?
Yes.
And what information did you provide Elizabeth Johnson?
I indicated to her that she needed to continue to provide for his basic needs, and that if it was ever discovered that he was not, that most likely another CPS report would be made and that I would again be out to the home.
And did you provide Elizabeth Johnson with your contact information?
I did.
And Tammi Smith already had your contact information?
That is correct.
Because she called you back?
Yes.
When you left that meeting with Elizabeth Johnson, Tammi Smith, and Gabriel Johnson on December 14th, 2009 that you indicated began at 1:30 p.m.? Is that correct? What was your understanding of where Gabriel was going to live?
My understanding that Gabriel was going to remain residing with Elizabeth Johnson.
Now, that day after you left the residence of Elizabeth Johnson, did you have some conversation with your supervisor about the case?
I did.
And at some point in time, was this case essentially closed out?
Yes, it was.
Now, you indicated that you talked about some allegations with Elizabeth Johnson, and you specifically talked about neglect. What exactly is neglect as far as Child Protective Services is concerned?
Neglect is not providing for the basic needs of a child, not providing a safe home environment, not providing food, not providing clothing, not providing medical care, those types of things.
And when you met with Gabriel Johnson, did you see any indication that there was neglect?
No, I did not.
And so if you're evaluating a case for neglect and you don't see any indication for neglect, well, let me ask you this. What are you looking for to be able to substantiate the allegation of neglect?
It's very difficult to substantiate a neglect allegation. It would have to be really significant. The home would have to be in complete shambles. There would have to be absolutely no food anywhere and no indication that the children had eaten in a significant amount of time. If it was a neglect regarding medical, it could be that they haven't been attending the medical appointments or providing the medication or anything of that matter as well.
Would leaving an infant child at home by themselves ever be considered neglect by Child Protective Services?
Yes, it would be.
In order to substantiate that allegation, would you need some sort of evidence other than the allegation itself?
Yes.
For instance, if one person said the child was left home alone, but you had no other evidence, would you be able to substantiate that?
I would not.
And to obtain evidence such as that, how would you obtain that evidence?
If I actually arrived at the home and there was no guardian or caretaker available and the child was in the home alone, that would be obvious evidence that I could substantiate the neglect.
And if you'd heard of some witnesses or something who had seen the child home alone or anything, would that help you?
It would.
And in this case, you didn't have any of that, is that correct?
No.
Does the fact that court proceedings, child custody proceedings are pending in a case involving a child have any effect on what you would do as an investigator?
Yes, they do. CPS operates under a different court. We operate under juvenile court, which is different from family court. Once proceedings have started in family court, we essentially allow that court jurisdiction to take over resolving any custody matters.
And in this case, you were aware proceedings had already been started. Did you talk to Logan McQueary after your meeting with Elizabeth Johnson, Tammi Smith, and Gabriel Johnson?
Yes, I recall that he had called me on December 17th, 2009, regarding the hearing that had taken place at the family court about the custody being established and paternity being established.
And so you were aware of what happened at that hearing?
Yes.
And was it December 24th, 2009 that you prepared this case for closure?
Yes.
After your meeting with Elizabeth Johnson, Tammi Smith, and Gabriel Johnson on December 14th, 2009, did you ever become aware that Gabriel Johnson was staying with Tammi Smith from December 14th through December 18th?
Not to my recollection.
At some point in time after this case was closed out, did you assist the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children regarding information on this case?
I did.
And what did you do to assist them?
They had contacted me and asked several questions to which I provided the answers.
Did you have anything else to do with any investigation in this case at that point?
No, I did not.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness? I'm showing you what's already been admitted into evidence as exhibit number 200. And based on previous testimony, we know that to be a report from Tammi Smith's BlackBerry phone. Could you take a look at page 4? You know, I'm going to approach again because I forgot where I wanted to show you. Now, if you could take a look at number 40 there.
That is my work phone number.
Okay, and so you indicate that you recognize on that document a phone number that belonged to you at work?
Correct.
Is there also an extension number?
There is.
And is the extension number something you recognize?
Yes.
Was that your extension number at the time you worked there?
Yes.
And is your name listed there?
Yes, it is.
And what does it say?
CPS Alicia.
After December 14th, 2009, do you recall receiving any contact whatsoever from Tammi Smith on this phone number?
I do not recall receiving any contact from her.
And, for that matter, on any phone number that you had?
Correct.
No further questions.
Thank you. Cross-examination. Ms. Phillips.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Shumway.
Good morning.
I understand you no longer work for CPS, correct?
Correct.
But back then, when you did work for CPS, what exactly was your legal authority?
In regards to
Anything.
Okay.
What was your legal authority?
As an investigator, we had the authority to remove children if we felt that there was an immediate safety threat risk to the children. We would serve what was called a temporary custody notice, which would then give the state of Arizona 72 hours to file documentation with the juvenile courts.
Okay, so any other legal authority besides, obviously, if you see a child in immediate danger, removing them from the home? Did you have any other legal authority other than that?
No.
Okay. And as you've described for us this morning, your job was to investigate homes, basically make sure kids aren't being hurt.
Correct.
And you were called to Elizabeth's trailer.
Yes.
Excuse me. And, I'm sorry. Hair. And as I understand it, when you first arrived at Elizabeth's trailer, you knocked on the door. She came to the door. You told her who you were and who you worked for, and she made you wait outside for a little while.
Yes.
Okay. And she explained to you it was because she was working some business selling her dogs.
Yes.
Okay. And you waited outside.
I did.
That was very gracious of you.
Thank you.
Okay. And once she did let you in after these people left with the dog, you observed that Gabriel was not in the home.
Correct.
And you had a conversation with her. And by the way, this was on December the 11th,
Yes.
correct? Your first contact with Elizabeth?
Yes.
But did the call from CPS come in earlier than that?
Yes.
It had come in on December the 9th?
December the 10th, I believe it was.
And so you had a conversation with Elizabeth without Gabriel there,
Yes.
as you testified this morning.
Yes.
Okay, and I don't want to go over everything that you said, but but she did tell you that Logan was on the birth certificate, but there was another man who was a potential father of Gabriel.
Yes.
And she did admit to you some volatile history or violent history with Logan.
Yes.
She also told you that Logan had abandoned her and Gabriel.
Yes.
And she told you that she was adopting him out,
Yes.
Gabriel.
Yes.
But she told you she didn't have any adoption paperwork.
Correct.
And was that in response to you asking her for adoption paperwork?
Yes.
Okay, and she said, I don't have any.
Yes.
So when that's the situation, you proceed on the assumption that mom still has custody.
Yes.
And that's what you did in this case.
Yes.
So Elizabeth told you that Gabriel was with Tammi.
That is correct.
And was that also in response to your asking her where Gabriel was?
Yes.
She gave you Tammy's phone number. Elizabeth gave you Tammy's phone number. Correct?
Yes.
And you called Tammi,
Yes.
correct? And you left a message.
Yes.
And she called you back.
Yes.
Okay. And so you talked to Tammi for a little bit.
Yes.
She agreed to bring Gabriel to Elizabeth's trailer where you could see him.
Correct.
Correct. And that was in response to your request?
Yes.
So then on December the 14th, you met Tammi and Elizabeth and Gabriel at the trailer.
That is correct.
Okay, so about 3 days after that initial conversation.
With Elizabeth?
Yes.
Correct.
Sorry, thank you for clarifying. Okay, and you've testified he was clean as far as you could tell,
Yes.
and he was healthy as far as you could tell.
Yes.
And Tammy told you that Gabriel had been with her for a few days.
Yes.
And then Elizabeth sort of changed her story,
Yes.
and she told you something completely different than what she had told you a couple of days earlier.
Yes.
And she denied that she was adopting the baby to the Smiths
Correct.
on the 14th.
Yes.
Okay, but she had told you that on the 11th.
That is correct.
Okay, and this gave you cause for concern about Elizabeth, didn't it?
It did.
Because she was directly lying to you.
Yes.
She had told you one story on the 11th and told you a completely different story on the 14th.
Yes.
So at this point, you had concerns both about her ability to be honest,
Yeah.
correct? And also about her mental health, her stability.
Yes.
And you had information about Elizabeth's violent history from both Elizabeth and Logan.
Correct.
But when you left the trailer on the 14th, you left the baby with Elizabeth and Tammy.
Yes.
And you were not concerned about his safety, apparently, or you wouldn't have left him, right?
Correct.
Now, Tammy told you at some point that she had a temporary guardianship of Gabriel, didn't she?
I cannot recall exactly, but I do know that I had that information. I don't remember when she had informed me.
Okay. You did have that information. Is that what you said? I just didn't hear you.
Yes.
At some point, you did get that information.
I did.
And you stated that you were aware that Logan had started court proceedings, to your knowledge, correct?
Correct.
I mean, you didn't go down the courthouse and look up to see the paperwork, did you?
He had provided me a family court case number.
Okay. Did you look it up?
At that time, I can't recall.
But is it fair to say you're certain there had been no orders entered at that point
I believe that is correct.
by the court?
Correct.
Okay. And the court order giving Logan his rights happened after your investigation on the 14th.
That is correct.
So on December the 14th, if I'm understanding your testimony correctly, legally, in your opinion, Elizabeth had custody.
Yes.
Legally. Thank you. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Redirect, Ms. Andrews.
Yes, Your Honor. One moment, please. Ms. Shumway, you indicated that at that time that Logan provided you the court case number. You don't recall if you looked it up.
That is correct.
Did you ever look into the court proceedings on the case?
I did.
And when was that?
Probably after he had called to inform me about the December 17th, 2009 hearing. I know at the time that I had met with him, he did have some documentation from the family court with the family court case number. That's how I was able to have it in my documentation.
And did you look at the documentation he had with him?
I did.
And defense counsel asked you some questions about your concerns about Elizabeth Johnson being truthful, and you had already talked about her saying one thing about the adoption and another. Did you confront her about her truthfulness?
I did.
And when you did that, was Tammi Smith present?
She was.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we let Ms. Shumway step down, does the jury have any questions for her? We do have a question, so sit tight. We're going to get that question. Okay. Ms. Shumway, I've got a question. I'm going to ask the question, but the jury's really asking the question, so if you give them the answer. Here's the question. Do you know why Tammi Smith would have a temporary guardianship?
I was informed by Elizabeth in the very first interview that I had with her on December 11th, 2009, that the child was residing with them, that they were in the process of that adoption. And generally, and I don't recall exactly, but generally when a child is with somebody else, that has to be in place just in case the child had any sort of medical problems or urgent matters that needed to be attended to. So I do not recall exactly if Elizabeth had told me that or if that was just something that I had assumed based upon my knowledge working in the system.
Follow up, Ms. Andrews.
Yes, Sean, thank you. Ms. Shumway, do you know much about temporary guardianship or the paperwork in order to have temporary guardianship?
I do.
Is a court order required to have temporary guardianship?
No.
What has to happen for someone to give temporary guardianship to someone else?
Basically, anybody can go to a courthouse or a notary and get something signed just stating that they placed this child with this person and allow that person to have access or to provide decisions based upon any medical, school, depending on what it is that the guardian feels like this temporary guardian can be allowed to do.
So if a parent signs a temporary guardianship document and somebody else has the child, would the person who had the child be able to get medical care for that
Yes.
child? Does that mean the person is now the parent of that child?
No, it does not.
Does that mean the person could make all parenting decisions for that child?
No, it does not.
What types of things would that person be able to do if they had a temporary guardianship?
They could seek medical help. They could enroll the child in school if the child was school aged. Basic stuff like that, basic day-to-day caretaking for the child that happens to be with them.
Have you ever known in your work anybody giving temporary guardianship to babysitters?
Not that I can recall, but I could see how that could be a potential situation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips.
I have a question, Your Honor.
Okay, does the jury have any other questions for Ms. Shumway before we let her go? Doesn't look like it. May this witness be excused, Ms. Andrews?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Phillips?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may step down, thank you. And the state may call its next witness.
Your Honor, the state now calls Detective Harris, and this is one of the witnesses, Your Honor, that cannot be televised.
Ms. Ramuno, you may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you. Detective, would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Good morning. My name is Matt Harris. I'm a detective with the Tempe Police Department.
Detective, how long have you been with the Tempe Police Department?
Just a little over 26 years.
And what positions have you held within the department?
I started out in uniform as a patrol officer in 1986. Did about 18 months in an undercover operation from late 89 to early 90s. Went back to patrol for a short time, then became a motorcycle officer. I was there for 9 years. 5 of those years I investigated serious injury and fatal traffic accidents. Moved from that position to an administrative position for about 18 months, and then I took my current position.
And what unit are you with within the department at the current time?
I'm in the Special Investigations Bureau.
And how long have you been in that bureau?
It'll be 10 years in June.
All right. Now, what are your assignments within that bureau?
Well, my job title is technical investigator, and what that is I essentially conduct wiretaps, electronic surveillance, video, GPS, audio, and more recently, well, actually from the whole time, doing analysis on phone records.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that at some point you did work as an undercover officer.
Yeah, maybe not in a traditional sense where it wasn't a narcotics operation. It was a plain clothes. We were mostly working property crimes, robberies, burglaries, that kind of thing, fugitives.
And your job duties now, or at least recent job duties, has that required you to be in the presence of undercover officers at times?
Daily.
Okay. And is that why you requested not to be televised today?
Yes.
All right. For the safety of the other officers that you may be seen with?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that you have, part of your job duties is to conduct cell phone record or phone record analysis?
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain what training or experience you've had in that area?
Specifically in just the cell phone area?
Yes.
Well, it kind of goes back to the wiretap training as well. In 2002, when I first came into the unit, I attended a 2-week training course in Florida on the basic installation and operation of telecommunication intercepts, which are wiretaps. I returned in August of that year for the advanced portion of that. That was another week-long class. January of 2009, I think it was a 3-day class put on by Cellular Data Resources. That training specifically addressed obtaining and analyzing cellular phone records and cell tower data. In February of 2009, I attended another class put on by the Public Agency Training Council. Same topic, just a different presenter. In October or November of 2010, I took the class from Cellular Data Resources again. Our department was sending some other detectives to the class. The instructor remembered who I was and offered me a free seat, so I went back again. In regards to cell phone records actually there was another class I took last year. I think that was sponsored by Public Agency Training Council. That was a week-long class held here locally, and it was taught by a homicide detective from the Gilbert Police Department.
All right. Now, in addition to the training that you've had regarding cell phone or phone records, have you had experience in looking at phone records, analyzing phone records, and gathering information from phone records?
Yes.
How many phone records would you say you've analyzed during your career?
I've seen hundreds, at least, of phone records over the 10 years, or nearly 10 years I've been doing this.
Now, specifically, are you familiar with records from the cell phone company Cricket?
Yes.
And are you familiar with phone records from the cell phone company Verizon?
Yes.
And I'm sure there's others that you are familiar with as well, but those are the two primary cell phone companies involved in this case. Would that be a fair statement?
The primary, yes.
Okay. There were others, though, that were looked at?
Yes.
Okay. Now I'm going to draw your attention to December of 2009. Were you asked to participate in an investigation involving a missing baby by the name of Gabriel Johnson at that time?
Yes, I was.
Okay, and can you tell us where you were or how you came to be involved in that investigation?
I was out of town, up at my cabin. I was fortunate that year to get a week off between Christmas and New Year's, which is very unusual with our department. And on the 27th at about 8:50 p.m. that night, I received a phone call from my commander at the time, Kim Hale.
Okay. And did she advise you of the situation that was presented to the police department at that time?
Yeah, Kim is a male, but he.
I'm sorry.
He gave me a little bit of background on what was occurring and asked for some assistance from me.
Okay. And what did he ask you to do?
He asked me to assist with implementing a PIN register trap and trace.
Okay. And did he ask in regards to a specific person?
Yeah, it was going to be in relation to a phone number that was known to be in the possession or being used by Elizabeth Johnson.
Okay. Now, can you explain to the jury what a pen register, pen trap, and trace is?
It's a form of a wiretap. It may not be the type of wiretap that you're commonly thought of, where people are sitting in a room listening to the actual phone conversations. We're not doing that in this particular instance. All we're recording is in real time data. And the data that's recorded is incoming and outgoing phone calls from the target phone, in this case, Elizabeth Johnson's phone, the date, the time the phone call occurred, how long that call lasted, and the cell tower used to either transmit the call from the phone or deliver the call to the target phone.
Now, did you assist in setting that up?
Yeah, there wasn't much I could do from my cabin. In order to set these pen registers up, there's a CALEA cover sheet that we have to fill out. A CALEA cover sheet is just a one-page form that's required by the service provider or the phone company.
And when you use the acronym CALEA, is that CALEA?
Yes, it is, and it stands for the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, which is essentially the wiretap laws that were implemented in the early 90s.
Okay, so you're required to provide that form,
Yes.
and then what happens at that point?
Well, the form requires me to fill out some information, mainly identify what the phone number is that we want to intercept, some billing information, some contact information for myself and whoever else I may put on there, specifically about the operation of the pen register. And then where do I want them to send that data once they program their system. And in this case, I requested that it be sent to the Mesa Police Department's collection equipment.
And why did you ask it to be sent to Mesa Police Department?
Well, our equipment wasn't working at that time. Even when our equipment was working, we shared space in the same building with Mesa. They had their equipment, we had our equipment. So I had a long-term relationship with my counterpart over there, and we commonly used their equipment to do these types of intercepts.
Okay, and was that eventually set up?
Yes, I was told. After I completed the CALEA cover sheet, I sent it back to Commander Hale, and somebody else was going to finish the process.
Okay. And did you receive information from that trap and trace?
No data was received from that.
What, do you know why not?
It was learned that on December 28th at about 2:18 in the morning, Arizona time, the phone was powered off either by the person in possession of the phone turning the phone off or the battery going dead. And this occurred, we knew that it was in the Houston, Texas market at that time. So it was 2:18 our time. It would have been 3:18 at that time of year in Houston in the morning on the 28th. And because the phone was turned off, consequently, no data is being passed through to us.
Okay. It's important to note that you were asked to assist on December 27th, correct?
Yes.
And that was about 24 hours after 12. It was within the next 24 hours that you learned that the cell phone had been turned off.
Well, actually, I did not learn that until I returned to work on Monday, January 4th.
Okay. All right. So when you returned on January 4th, you followed up at that time?
I spoke with my partner at the time.
And he informed you of that information?
Yes.
Okay. Now, on January 4th, did you as well attend a meeting in reference to this investigation?
I did.
And where was that meeting held?
In the Chiefs conference room at our headquarters.
And what was the purpose of that meeting?
They were having almost daily meetings back then, and it was just to discuss what the progression of the case was and generate ideas on how to proceed.
Okay, and what happened at the conclusion of that meeting in regards to you?
Well, I don't specifically recall them giving me any direct assignment, but I returned to my office and began. It was made apparent to me, or told to me during that meeting, that Elizabeth had been taken into custody on the 30th, a few days before. It was really unknown how she traveled from San Antonio to Houston and on to Miami, where she was taken into custody. So when I returned to my office, I began taking a look at her phone records and analyzing specifically the cell towers that were used during the time the phone was powered on to determine her general area or location when those calls were either made or received.
Okay, and how had you received those records at that point?
Well, I believe the records generally, a 48-hour emergency or an exigent request was made on December 27th when this all kicked off. Generally, the phone provider will only provide you 48 hours of records at that time, and then later you would have to follow up with a court order. So I had limited, I believe at that time I only had maybe 48 hours of records, and I had been told that Detective McCluskey had obtained those.
And with regard to the information that you had at that time, did you in fact conduct a cell phone analysis on Elizabeth Johnson's Cricket cell phone?
I did.
All right. And did you create charts indicating her whereabouts using the information from those phone records?
I did.
Okay. And those phone records have since been certified by the cell phone company, correct?
They have, yes.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm showing you what's marked as Exhibit 210. Do you recognize that envelope?
I do.
And what is contained within that envelope, Detective?
In my handwriting, on the outside of the envelope, it reads Certified Cricket, Elizabeth Johnson, and then her phone number. Do you want me to read the phone numbers?
Yes, we will be reading a phone number into the record now, Your Honor.
Okay, so we're going to read a phone number. Let's have our audio off for a moment. Go ahead.
A little bit further down, it says Logan McQueary, and then 3 phone numbers are listed.
Do you want him to read those phone numbers?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we're going to read 3 more phone numbers.
And within that envelope, Detective, what is contained within that envelope?
The top document here is a certification of records, and it says regarding Arizona versus Tammi Smith.
Okay, and what records are contained within that certification?
There are subscriber records for Logan McQueary's phones. Actually, there's 2 subscriber records for his phones. There are documents that Cricket sends out anytime we request called detail records from them or phone records from them. They send out a little pamphlet on how to interpret those records. There's a separate document similar to how to read the CDRs that tell you how to read when Cricket sends their records to you, they'll send you phone call records. The data for the text messaging, not the content, just what number texted what number, comes separately. Slightly different format. They send instructions on how to interpret those records. There is a cell tower list for San Antonio, a cell tower list for Houston, Texas, and a cell tower list for Phoenix, Arizona. There are the actual call detail records or the phone records for Elizabeth Johnson's phone. There are call detail records from July 7th of 09 to December 3rd of 09 for one of Logan McQueary's phones, the one ending in 5020. There are call detail records that go from November 14th, 2009 to December 16th, 2009 on Logan McQueary's phone ending in 7657.
And Detective, I just want to be clear that the date that you mentioned, what's the last date of the record?
You know what, I didn't realize that these are printed on double sides. So it goes from the phone number ending in 7657. The records begin on November 14th, 2009, and it ends on December 16th, 2009. there's more records for the same phone number, 7657-2009, that continue till December 24th or 21st, 2009. And then there are more records on phone number ending in 76 that began on December 22nd, 2009, ending on January 1st, 2010. And then there is one page of records on phone number for Logan McQueary ending in 0. They begin on November 16th, 2009, and end on December 20th, 2009.
And if you could just place those back in the envelope, or actually, let me take them. Detective, I'm also showing you States Exhibit 219 and 220. And are these the records that are contained within that envelope but just separated out by user?
This is Exhibit 219 is Elizabeth Johnson's records. And Exhibit 220 is Logan McQueary's records for the phone number ending in 7.
Now, had it been determined throughout the course of the investigation that the primary phone number that Logan McQueary had been using during the relevant time regarding his son is the one ending in 7657?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the state will move to enter into evidence exhibits 210, 219, and 220.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibits 210, 219, and 220 are admitted. And with that, we've probably hit a good breaking point, and we've hit the lunch hour, so we're going to take our lunch break. We will come back at 1:30, so have a good lunch, ladies and gentlemen. Until then, remember the admonition. We'll see you at 1:30.
All rise.
Okay, please be seated, everyone. Anything we need to talk about before we break? We're going to come back at 1:25 to have argument on defendant's motion for reconsideration regarding Dr. O'Connell. Anything else from the state's perspective?
No, Your Honor.
From the defendant's perspective?
No, Your Honor.
All right, I'll see you at 1:25. Engaged in a discussion with Detective Harris regarding his testimony. I understand you want to do that, but we set a time 10 minutes ago to talk about this, and I want to try and keep a schedule. I'm not sure what's happening with that, and whether you need more time, but it's something that we should take care of during breaks, not at the time that we're supposed to be going. So we're going to get to the hearing on the motion to reconsider. I've reviewed the motion to reconsider. I've reviewed the testimony of Ms. Ayala that's referenced in the motion. Ms. Phillips, what else do you want to tell me besides what's in the motion?
Thank you, Your Honor, and I can be brief. I know Your Honor has reviewed everything. Your Honor, basically it's the defense position that the state has now opened the door to us allowing, or for the court to allow us to have Dr. O'Connell testify. You'll recall, Your Honor, that during the evidentiary hearing, during Your Honor's ruling, you made some statement that you might reconsider or revisit the issue of Dr. O'Connell should the state open the door, depending on what 404B evidence was admitted. So that's why we're bringing this up again, Your Honor. We believe that it is right to revisit this issue based on Ms. Ayala's testimony, because the state, and I will concede, Your Honor, I believe I brought up the term, it's a Tammy thing, or what's a Tammy thing, on my cross-examination of Ms. Ayala. It was a statement she had made during her defense interview. But, Your Honor, I would say the state went far beyond the scope of what I asked Ms. Ayala by repeating again and again and again, it's a Tammy thing. So what do you mean by a Tammy thing? You still consider it a Tammy thing. What makes it a Tammy thing? And ultimately, Your Honor, they were trying to get Ms. Ayala to say that it was obsessive behavior. That was what the state was trying to elicit from Ms. Ayala. She's the only person that has used the term obsessive. Her and her husband, Sam, both used that term, I believe, in their interviews. And Ms. Ramuno used that term in her opening statement to the jury, and they needed Ms. Ayala to say that it was obsessive behavior to prove up that part of their case. So, Your Honor, they intentionally elicited this. It describes behavior, specific behavior, and specifically it describes a character trait. And, Your Honor, in order for Ms. Smith to be able to present a full defense, we should be able to put on Dr. O'Connell to explain those traits to the jury.
Okay, Ms. Andrews?
Well, Your Honor, first of all, I disagree that we opened the door, the defense opened the door by asking Ms. Ayala the question. And I know Your Honor has read everything, but for the record's sake, what the question was on cross-examination was, the question from Ms. Phillips was, and she told you this during one of your telephone conversations with you. And Ms. Ayala responded, correct. And the question was, and you sort of brushed it off, didn't you? And the answer was yes. And the question was, in fact, you thought this sounds like another Tammy thing. And the response was, yeah. And they moved on from that. What happened in redirect is that I said to Ms. Ayala, defense counsel asked you about a statement you had made when you referred to Tammy calling up and telling you that you had met a girl in the airport, and you referred to it as a Tammy thing. Explain to us what you meant by a Tammy thing. And, Your Honor, Ms. Ayala began to explain the answer, and then she said she went up to pregnant people in airports. And then she started to say she went up to something else, and there was an objection by the defense, and Your Honor decided that it was outside the scope. And I'll tell you, because I think it's important procedurally, I didn't understand why you felt it was outside the scope. I understood after the fact, because what Ms. Ayala said is she went up to pregnant people in airports. And the evidence in this case is not that Elizabeth Johnson was pregnant. But what I realized, Your Honor, is I don't think Ms. Ayala knew that. I don't think she ever realized that the baby was present with her at the time. I don't believe she ever testified the baby was present, that Tammi Smith indicated she met the baby, just that she met the woman. And the baby was very young at the time. He was fairly newborn. And so that's why I didn't understand the problem with the testimony at the time, because I believed she was talking about Elizabeth Johnson, but now I understand why the court probably didn't understand that. And so the court ruled that it was outside the scope, and we had some discussion about me being able to ask her that because I was a little confused. And so the next question I asked her was, at the time that you felt it was a Tammy thing, what was your reaction to her conversation about meeting Elizabeth at the airport? I directed her right back to Elizabeth Johnson in that meeting. And then she said, I really didn't pay much attention to it because it just seemed like another attempt of having a baby or getting a baby. And then I asked her, was there a time at any point during the Gabriel Johnson situation where you stopped thinking of it as a Tammy thing? She asked me to clarify. I said, your position about everything you talked to Tammy about, do you still consider it a Tammy thing? She said, yes. How do you still consider it a Tammy thing? What makes it a Tammy thing? And her response was, because it was obsessed behavior over trying to get a baby. Now, I'll tell you, Honor, I did not know she was going to say that. I was trying to get her to explain what was happening, her reasons for it. Essentially, I just wanted her to explain what she meant by Tammy thing, because defense counsel asked her and then never asked her what she meant by that. And so I don't think I opened the door. I think the defense opened the door. But even if the door was opened, because the defense certainly wants to open the door to Dr. O'Connell's testimony, I don't see that that changes anything. In the original response to the state's motion to preclude, defense counsel argued that our position was going to be that we had this evidence that was going to show that Tammi Smith was obsessed with getting a baby. In the supplement where defense counsel talked about character evidence, she discussed the fact that we were going to get into this 404 evidence. At oral argument where we discussed this, we discussed the 404 evidence, and then we discussed the 404 evidence regarding Ms. Ayala's testimony in detail. And so I don't understand where her testimony puts us in any different position than we were when you made the original ruling that Dr. O'Connell's testimony is not relevant at this point. And I still don't believe that they've laid a foundation for how testimony about personality rebuts the exact acts and statements by witnesses about actual things that Tammi Smith has done that they witnessed her doing or that they heard her say, how evidence of her personality rebuts that.
Okay. I agree with the state. I don't think that there's been a door open, regardless of who may have opened it, sufficient to change my analysis at all. At the time we had oral argument previously, we had already had the state's opening statement regarding alleged obsessive behavior, and so I assume that was coming in some form or another in terms of evidence, whether it be from a witness or a document. And so nothing that was said by Ms. Ayala was really surprising to me or changed the analysis. In essence, what you're asking to do is explain a behavior. Now, people may have put labels on it, and the state may argue it's obsessive, and a witness may say that, but simply explaining a behavior with an expert witness to talk about character traits is not appropriate. Again, it doesn't go for 404 purposes, it's not pertinent evidence because it doesn't legally matter from my perspective why she may have engaged in certain behaviors or exactly why she was motivated to do certain things. Even if we characterize what the state is doing as an attempt to show motive, that she was obsessed, you're not really attacking motive, you're explaining it. And an explanation is not an appropriate use of the character evidence, and certainly not through an expert witness. I don't think there's any support for it, and my analysis hasn't changed, and the testimony didn't move me at all in terms of making me believe that the door had been opened or that we're in a different place, because I just don't think we are under Mott and the cases that we've talked at great lengths about. So I don't believe that there's been a change such that the door's been opened or there's some other circumstance that would make me reconsider my ruling. Let me give you, if you want to tell me anything else, I'll give you an opportunity to do it. You may be finished with me in terms of this discussion, and that's fine if you are, but I always let you have essentially a last word if you want.
Judge, I think the record is made. I think the position is clear. I don't think we need to belabor it. Clearly, you've made your decision.
Okay. So the defendant's motion for reconsideration of the court's order granting the motion to preclude is denied. All right. So are we ready to otherwise go? Do we have an issue in terms of the witness from the defense perspective? I know there was a discussion about maybe an exhibit. So do we have something we need to resolve?
No, you're
Your Honor, there is one thing that we want to put on the record. I'm not sure if we're going to come back between the break between witnesses, but in regard to Detective Thompson's testimony, I did not give the defense a heads up. I apologize because we just discussed this as you were coming in. There is a possibility that we may at some point want to play the free talk with Elizabeth Johnson after Detective Thompson testifies. The problem is at this point it cannot be played to the jury in its entirety because there's conversation about Tammi Smith taking a polygraph, and so we can't play it. We intend to lay the foundation for it with Detective Thompson on the stand, but I wanted to give fair warning so the defense didn't attempt to play an exhibit. I believe that if we decide we want to play it later, we're going to have to redact the portions that are of concern before we can ever play it.
Okay. So what you're saying is this is meant as a heads up that at least part of the purpose for the examination of Detective Thompson is to lay a foundation for playing the Elizabeth Johnson interview, so you know that that's coming and you can consider that when you're cross-examining. Okay.
And Your Honor, may we approach on another issue?
You may. Let's turn off. Okay, we can turn the microphone back on. All right, let's cover a couple things. First of all, let's start with Detective McCluskey. There's a request from Detective McCluskey that not only does he not want his face to be seen, he is in the midst of an investigation where recognition of his voice would be a problem because he's conducting an investigation via the telephone where he's interacting with someone, and his concern is if they hear his voice, it will affect an investigation. And so I'm going to respect that. I don't know how likely that is, but if there's any question, then I need to respect it. So we're down to, for Detective McCluskey only, we're down to can't see his face, and this is for the media folks, and cannot hear his voice. So I don't know what that means, but I wanted to give you a heads up. Is he next coming in?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, so he's going to be the next witness. And so I don't know if you can, again, I'll leave it to you to deal with that from your perspective. I don't know if he's going to be, are you planning on playing some audio at that time too?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, during the audio, then we can go back on audio-wise if it's just being played, but his voice can't come through.
Lana Jacobson, Your Honor, over this session. What I would suggest is that we record the testimony and go back and obscure his voice. That's the only thing I can think of.
Well, I guess
You told me to do it in real time.
from my perspective, we need to make sure his voice doesn't get out there. However you can do that is fine with me. Whether you want to change his voice and whether you can do that in real time, I don't know. But either way, we can't have his voice out there for the reason I stated. So however you want to deal with it.
Would it be acceptable if we record his voice only without transmitting it and then go back and edit? I'm not sure that's possible, but it might be an option.
Yes, but we have to be careful. I recognize people in the courtroom are going to be able to see and hear it. I think the concern is just broadcast outside the courtroom. If it's not broadcast outside the courtroom in a way that it can be recognized, I'm comfortable with it. Let me make sure the attorneys, Ms. Ramuno, any issue with that?
I don't see the issue. Ms. Andrews is checking with the detective to see if he knows of any problem that could exist with that, but I don't see one at this time.
I think that sounds like a method that we can utilize.
May I also ask if the detective's voice is on the tape that's going to be played?
It is not.
It is not.
It is not, okay.
So any audio that's played, you can come back on. And we'll give you a signal that we're playing audio, so you have some time. But the audio can be played.
Your Honor, I just checked with Detective McCluskey, and he has no objection with his voice being distorted to be played later, as long as there are assurances that it will be distorted.
Okay. So you can play it as long as you distort it in a way that it won't be recognized. Okay. And now we have some issues, I think, or an issue regarding what Detective McCluskey can testify to and what he can't.
And, Your Honor, the defense is willing to stipulate to at least part of Detective McCluskey's testimony so that none of this even has to be an issue. The defense is willing to stipulate that he co-authored the affidavit for the wiretap and that he obtained the court order for the wiretap and that he basically helped set up the wiretap on the Smith's phone. We're willing to stipulate to all of that, and Detective McCluskey doesn't even need to testify for that portion. My understanding, however, is that the state is going to be eliciting testimony from Detective McCluskey about the content of some of those recorded phone conversations. And obviously, we're not going to stipulate to that portion of his testimony. However, Your Honor, I think the state has foundational issues with getting those recordings in because Detective McCluskey, in his defense interview, indicated he only monitored some of the recordings, not all of them, that other detectives did that a third-party monitoring agency monitored the recordings and provided summaries, and there is a foundational issue as to how he can identify the speakers on the recordings. The recordings are Craig Cherry and Tammi Smith, and I don't know how the state can lay the foundation for Detective McCluskey being able to
to identify those voices. So those are my concerns, Your Honor.
Ms. Ramuno?
Your Honor, Detective McCluskey will testify that he did listen to some of the conversations during overseeing the wiretap and that he is familiar with Tammi Smith's voice. He listened to the particular recordings that we intend on playing and identified that as her voice. I don't believe that there's any further foundation that is necessary at that point to admit the recordings of Tammi Smith.
And Judge, if I may, the detective said in his interview that he had never met Tammi. So if someone pointed out to him that was Tammy's voice, that's hearsay. And again, as far as Mr. Cherry's voice, there's no foundation there, Judge.
We have different issues as to the different speakers. I think as to Tammi Smith's voice, if he was part of the investigation, if he monitored her phone, if they had a consistent voice that was identified as Ms. Smith's voice, he doesn't have to hear every single transmission as long as he can validate that these are recordings from the phone. I think that's a sufficient foundation as to Ms. Smith.
But Judge, if someone hasn't told him this is Ms. Smith talking, how does he know? He's never met her.
So your position is to ever get that in, he's got to go talk to Ms. Smith or view
Through this witness, Judge.
I don't think that's right.
Your Honor, if he has familiarity with her voice on the phone, this is a wiretap on her phone. We have documents that indicate this is her phone. She identifies herself as Tammi in the recordings. In fact, 2 of them are voicemails where she leaves her name for the detectives. I don't understand how that doesn't tie it to Tammi Smith.
My sense is that's an appropriate amount of foundation, and if the jury somehow believes it may not be her, you want to argue that it's not her, you can. But from a foundational standpoint, I think that is sufficient foundation as to Ms. Smith. Your position would require then for anyone to identify a voice, they would have to go beyond someone saying, this is Tammi, and they're listening to her phone and they hear multiple conversations. Now they have to go talk to her, because most targets of most wiretap investigations, they don't have videos of the person talking, that to ever identify that person, even though they said, this is Tammi, and it's their phone, the witness would have to go to court and listen to that person, and I just don't think that's a reasonable foundational standard. I think that there's enough foundation with the speaker identifying herself, it's her voice and a consistent voice throughout the recordings. To me, that's enough foundation for Ms. Smith. Mr. Cherry may be a little bit different, but for Ms. Smith, I think there's enough foundation there.
Okay, so then the ruling is, Judge, on the recordings with Mr. Cherry.
Well, I guess I have to hear it because I'm not sure. Again, I think they're going to argue, well, are you going to play recordings with Mr. Cherry?
Yes.
Okay. And the foundation for that
Between him
is?
and Tammi Smith.
Okay.
Where he identifies himself as Craig. They're speaking about the subject matter, which they have a connection to in this case, quite explicitly, regarding the forged document. And in fact, she refers to him as her cousin in one of the recordings, and they're discussing how his name got on the document.
Why isn't that enough to lay a reasonable foundation for the speaker being Craig Cherry? And you can argue, if you want, that it's not Craig Cherry, but reasonably, I don't think I have to drag someone in who says, yes, I've spoken to Craig Cherry, and that's definitely his voice. It's somebody who says they're Craig talking to Tammi Smith. By the substance of the conversation, can't the jury conclude one way or the other? And I think it lays a reasonable foundation for it being what the state says it is.
Again, Your Honor, the concern is that Detective McCluskey did not monitor all of these phone calls. He has apparently gotten bits and pieces of information from other detectives in the case. That would be hearsay. He was not one of the main investigators on this case. He admits in his defense interview that his main role was just to get the wiretap set up. The state used a third party, the Tempe Police uses a third party monitoring company who apparently does summaries of what's going on in the wiretaps. I don't have those names or who those people are or what he may have reviewed as far as those summaries?
But that would be, to me, I'd be not persuaded, but more compelled by your argument if they were trying to get the detective to simply testify what she said. But they're trying to lay a foundation, so we're talking about foundation. Once they lay the foundation and play it, it says what it says. And it doesn't matter if he monitored some of them. If he can lay the foundation that these are the calls that we monitored, they came from here, this is how we do it. We're getting back to that same thing that we talked about, the evidence from Florida. Do we have to go through every hand that touched it? No, not necessarily for everything. And for me, for this evidence, if he can lay a foundation that these are what the state says they are, that there was a wiretap, that he monitored enough to know that these recordings are from that wiretap, from her phone, then to me, that's enough foundation to get it in. If it's a wiretap of her phone, to me, that's enough. And then we can play it, and if you want to argue that the voices aren't who the state claims they are, you're free to do it. But I don't think that they've got a foundational issue as to either Craig Cherry or to Ms. Smith to argue it. I think that they are likely to lay sufficient foundation. Now, I haven't heard it. If he walks away from it and says, I understand there was a wiretap and somebody handed me something and said it was the wiretap, but I don't have any connection to it, then we're talking about foundation. But based on what I'm hearing, I think they can get there. Now, you can object, and depending on how it comes in, but what I'm saying, I'm likely to overrule it.
Thank you, Your Honor, and I will object for the record.
Okay. Anything else we need to talk about before we continue?
No, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get the jury and continue with Detective Harris. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Sorry we're a little late getting going. Hope you had a good lunch. We left off with Detective Harris, and I think we're in the midst of direct examination. So, Ms. Ramuno, you may proceed.
Thank you. Detective Harris, before the break, you had just talked about obtaining the certification regarding Elizabeth Johnson and Logan McQueary's cricket records, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you obtained a number of certifications in this case, correct?
Yes.
All right. And may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm showing you what's marked as Exhibit 212. Do you recognize that envelope?
I do.
And what is that?
On the outside, again, it's written Verizon Certified, the name Tammi Smith, the initials or the acronym CDRs for call detail records, and then Tammi Smith's phone number.
And Your Honor, I would like to read the phone number.
Okay, so we're going to read a phone number, so we need to be aware of that for media purposes. Go ahead.
And what is that? And what is within that envelope?
There's a compact disc. It's got a Verizon case number on it. And the disc contains the call detail records that were certified.
And for what month is that?
The certification indicates December 2009.
Okay. And then there's another set of papers in there?
This also has a case number on it. It's different than the one for the CD. It's referenced, again, Tammi Smith's phone, and it's a hard copy, 8 pages of a hard copy of call detail records for her phone that go from December 24th, 2009, ending on December 29th, 2009. And then there's also attached the subscriber record for that phone number.
Thank you. And I'm showing you State's Exhibit 214. Do you recognize what's within that folder?
These are are Verizon call detail records for Tammi Smith's phone. The beginning date was December 1st, 2009. Ending on December 30th, 2009.
And is that printout a printout of what is contained on this disc? In the
Yes.
previous exhibit?
Yes, it is.
And I would move to enter into evidence at this time Exhibits 212 and 214.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibits 212 and 214 are admitted.
Okay, now earlier, Detective, you had mentioned that you had done an analysis of the cell phone use of Elizabeth Johnson during a certain period of time.
Yes.
Okay. And what period of time did you do the cell phone tower analysis?
Well, initially I began by doing December 27th, 2009 only.
And did that expand at some point?
Yes. Then it expanded back to December 21st through the 27th of December 2009.
And did you do that analysis utilizing the records that had previously been admitted?
Yes.
All right. I'm showing you what's marked as Exhibits 222 and 223. Do you recognize these documents?
Document 222 is a map, essentially. It spans from San Antonio to Houston, and it's graphically illustrating locations of cell towers that Elizabeth Johnson's phone used on December 27th. Exhibit 223 is a similar map, only it's depicting the location of cell towers that were used exclusively within the San Antonio, or the city of San Antonio, between the 21st of December and December 27, 2009.
And I would move to enter into evidence this time Exhibits 222 and 223.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibits 222 and 223 are admitted.
Now, before we take a look at this and show the jury what's on the maps, can you explain to the jury how a cell phone tower analysis is done?
Essentially, you're given the call detail records, and depending on what time frame, in the first example here, I was looking at just December 27th, and I would look at the first call that was either outgoing or incoming, and specifically what cell tower was used to either send that call out or deliver it to the target phone. Also provided in those records were the other piece of the puzzle is I need a list of cell tower locations for the market that phone is being used in this case, San Antonio. So I would take the cell tower information that's provided in the call detail records, look that cell tower up in the cell tower list provided to me by the phone company, and then use the longitude and the latitude of the location of that cell tower and plot it on the map.
Okay, and so during this analysis, you utilized Elizabeth Johnson's records, Logan McQueary's records, and Tammi Smith's records?
Actually, those maps were generated just off of Elizabeth Johnson's records from the phone numbers appearing in those records and other information I had already learned, I knew who she was communicating with.
Based on the phone numbers that were listed in there, you knew
Yes.
who those phone numbers belong to.
Right.
Okay, I'm showing you what's within Exhibit 219. Sure. In Exhibit 219 are the cell phone records
Yes, counsel, do we have some phone numbers that we're concerned about on these records?
Yes.
Okay, so we can't show this exhibit.
Okay, so Detective, these are the call records of Elizabeth Johnson, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you were referring to the cell tower. You were talking about that in your previous testimony. Is that what this column indicates?
It does.
Okay. And so on a person's phone record, and specifically on this phone record, what does the SA stand for?
And each phone company is different, but for Cricket Communications, the way they list their cell tower records or identifier, the first two digits of that combination, alpha and numeric combination, the first two digits are the market in which that cell tower is located. So in this case, the SA indicates it was in the San Antonio, Texas market.
And what does the rest of that, what do the rest of those digits refer to?
The first digit after the two letters in this, on the first line of data there, the number 3, indicates the sector of the cell tower that was used to route that call. And cell towers typically, most cell towers are 3-sided. They would have 3 sectors. If you can imagine a circle divided into 3 equal units. Each unit would be 120 degrees to equal 360. So sector 1, there would be a sector 1, it would be 120 degrees in span. Sector 2, the same, sector 3. That way you get a 360-degree projecting cell tower. On this first call, sector 3 of that tower was used. Now, the next piece of the puzzle is you need to know in what direction does sector 3 point. And that varies from cell tower to cell tower. In the cell tower list, that information would be provided. They refer to it as the azimuth of that sector, and it's going to be related in degrees. In a perfect world, sector 1 would point due north. So the azimuth indicates the center of the sector. So in a perfect world, sector 1 would have an azimuth of 0 degrees or 360 degrees, because 0 and 360 are the same as far as the location on a circle. To find out where the span of that sector is, we know, in a perfect world, 120-degree sector, since the azimuth is in the middle, we would go 60 degrees on either side of 0, and that would give me a pictorial representation of what area that sector would cover. So I don't have the cell tower list. I don't know what the azimuth for sector 3 is, but assuming it's 0, and I am looking for somebody, I would start with whatever that sector would cover. Now, it doesn't give me any indication of how close that phone is to the tower. There's no way for me to determine that. And there's a lot of factors that go into how close or how far a phone may be from a particular tower in a particular sector.
Okay. So essentially, are most cell towers 3-sided?
Most common towers are 3-sided. If you drive around town, you see them all over the place. But there are 6-sided towers also.
And that would be indicated in the number if it says 4, 5, or 6 at that point.
Well, they also have, They call them double stacks. They're 2 3-sided towers, but one above the other. They're rotated. The sectors are rotated slightly different. The sectors are going to be narrower than 120 degrees. But one tower has sectors 1, 2, 3. The other tower might have sectors 4, 5, 6.
Okay.
They call that a 6-sided tower also.
All right. So as far as those first two numbers are concerned, it refers to what side of the tower the cell phone is hitting.
Yes.
Because when a person makes a call, it communicates with that tower, correct?
Yes.
And that's how that's how the cell phone company receives the information as to which tower it's hit.
Correct.
Okay. And so the remaining numbers in that series of numbers, what does that refer to?
Well, if there were the first two digits, the first two zeros, you can disregard. They don't mean anything in this particular case because there's no digit there other than a 0. The 92 or the 92 indicates that that particular call was made on Sector 3 of tower number 92 in the San Antonio market.
Okay. And you're able to look up where those are located, correct?
Yes.
This is Exhibit 222, and I believe you indicated previously that this is the map of December 27th, 2009 solely, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
And this indicates what cell tower was used up here, correct? Tower, for example, in the upper left here, it's tower number 92.
Yes, and each of those text boxes, the first line of data will be the tower number. Now, I've extracted or eliminated the SA and any extraneous digits in there, and there's no indication of sectors. I did not do sector analysis on these particular phone calls. I was just interested in where those cell towers were located.
Okay, and does number 1 mean the first location that you found?
Yes,
This box right up here?
right. Those digits that I put on there sequentially from 1 through, I think, 9 indicate the what sequence in the progression of the day that cell tower was used.
All right. So number 1, the first call is Tower 92, and it's an outgoing call to the Tornado Bus Company?
Correct.
All right. And then call number 2 comes down around here to the bottom left using Tower 82, and there's a series of calls that hit off of this tower, correct?
Yes.
All right. And I believe it's 11:47. There's an incoming call from Tammi Smith.
Yes.
At 12:56, an incoming call from Logan McQueary.
Yes.
At 12:58, an incoming call from Logan McQueary.
Yes.
At 13:08 or 1:08 p.m., an outgoing call to Logan McQueary.
Yes.
Right. And then we come around here now to the third tower that's utilized, and that's Tower 71.
It is.
Okay, and it looks like there were 30 outbound calls to Logan McQueary, all under 15-second durations during that time.
Yes, between 13:09 and 13:21.
And that indicates that Elizabeth Johnson was making outbound calls to Logan McQueary.
Yes.
Then the fourth tower that's indicated on here is Tower 125.
Correct.
At 14:52 hours or 2:52, there's an incoming call from Sergeant Lenzen.
That's correct.
Okay, and does this indicate, from looking at this, that she's traveling westward at this point?
She is not. She's traveling.
I'm sorry, eastward.
Okay.
Sorry.
That it does indicate.
Okay. And then the next tower is up here at number 5,
Yes.
Tower 123. And it indicates at 15:10, 15:11, and 15:30 hours, which is 3:10, 3:11, and 3:30, correct?
Yes.
That there's a WAP session. What does that mean?
In the CDRs, where in one of the columns where you would expect to see a phone number, you see #777. called Cricket to ask them what that was indicative of. And a pound 777 showing up in that particular column indicates that they were initiating a WAPS, what they call a WAP session, and WAP stands for Web Access Portal. So they were accessing email or the internet or something of that nature. It was not a phone call.
Okay, and I'm just going to place this phone record over the map at this time. Is that pound 777 right there what you're referring to?
That is, and the column next to it, I can't remember what the header name of that column with the pound 77 is. Can you go to the top on that? Okay, the dialed number. You can go back down now, please. So pound 777 in the dialed number column, as well as the adjacent column to the right, which is the direction of the phone call. Whether you would have to decipher what's in there, but it indicates whether it's an incoming or an outgoing. And those those 3 question marks indicate also it's a WAP session.
Okay. All right. And then I believe later on that same number 5, there's an outgoing call to Malcolm Phipps at 3:20 p.m.
Yes, all on that same tower.
Okay. And then we have...
Can I clarify something on this?
Sure.
That call occurred in between. She did 2 WAP sessions, made the call to Phipps, and then she did another WAP session. So,
Okay,
just
so
to be clear on that.
those indicate 3 separate sessions that...
Yes.
All right. And then number 6 is using Tower 394
Yes.
at 3:37 and 3:39, again, 2 more WAP sessions.
Yes.
All right. And then number 7 at 16:18 hours, there was an outgoing call to Soren Stanisiu.
Yes.
Okay.
And also, for clarification, we have now moved from the San Antonio market into the Houston market.
Okay. Houston's indicated right here?
Yes.
And this surrounding area is the Houston market?
Yes.
Okay. Then we have 8 using Tower 197 at 16:49 hours, an incoming call from Mr. Stanisiu.
Yes.
And then at the 9th box on here is Tower 354 at 19:09 and at 19:29, 2 outgoing calls again to Mr. Stanisiu.
Yes.
Now, you indicated also, this is Exhibit 223, that then you went back and did an analysis beginning on December 21st, 2009?
Correct.
All right. And between December 21st and December 27th, 2009, this is all indicated within the San Antonio area
Right.
until the movement started on Exhibit
Eastbound.
number 222.
Yes.
And on this map, you did not notate calls that were made to whom, just
no.
at what time they occurred and what date.
Yeah, could you slide it up also just a little bit? Okay.
Thank you. And that cell phone tower analysis was done on what date, Detective?
January 4th, 2010.
And at that time, Elizabeth Johnson had already been taken into custody?
Yes.
Now, you also obtained other telephone records, in this case, of other individuals. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm showing you what's marked as Exhibit 218. Do you recognize what's within this folder?
There is a certification I received from Verizon Wireless on a telephone number for Janet Morris.
And Your Honor, I will be asking him to read a phone number into the record at this time.
Okay, he's going to read a number. Let's make sure that that number does not get broadcast outside the courtroom. Go ahead.
And what is that phone number? And is that from Verizon?
It is, and it contains, the records they're certifying are the subscriber record for that phone.
And a subscriber record, does that simply mean the person who has signed up to use that phone?
Yes. Well,
Pays the bill for that phone?
yes, it may not necessarily be the user of the phone, but it's the person that is paying or the subscriber to the service.
I would move to enter into evidence Exhibit 218 at this time.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 218 is admitted.
I'm showing you what's marked as Exhibits 211 and 217.
Exhibit 211, manila envelope with my handwriting, Verizon certified, Jack Smith, his phone number, and then CDRs and text content.
And Your Honor, I would like to ask for the phone number to be read into evidence at this
Okay, we're
time.
going to read a phone number. Let's not broadcast it outside the courtroom. Go ahead.
And what is within the envelope?
There is a compact disc with a Verizon case number written on it. It says certified records. The same case number is written on the paper copy of the certification for these records, and it indicates dates of December 20th, 2009 to January 3rd, 2010.
And Exhibit 217, do you recognize what's within this folder?
These are the call detail records for Jack Smith on the phone number that I previously read. The beginning date of the records is December 20th, 2009. The ending date is January 3rd, 2010.
And is that a printout of what is contained on this disc?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would move to enter into evidence at this time. States Exhibit 211 and 217.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibits 211 and 217 are admitted.
I'm showing you what's marked as Exhibits 213, 216, and 215. 213, 215, and 216.
Okay, exhibit number 213, again, a manila envelope, has my handwriting, Verizon certified, Tammi Smith, text message content. Okay, the envelope contains 3 certification letters.
And do those certification letters cover the text messages for that phone number between December 24th, 2009 and January 3rd, 2010? Oh, there's 3 separate
Yeah,
ones that cover
all of
those
them,
dates.
yes.
And then Exhibit 215, do you recognize what's within that folder?
215?
Yes.
Yes, it's text message content from Verizon Wireless between December 24th and December 31st, 2009.
And then the folder marked Exhibit 216, do you recognize what's within that folder?
Text message content, again, on Tammi Smith's phone number from Verizon that spanned January 1st, 2010 to January 3rd, 2010.
Enter into evidence at this time Exhibits 213, 215, and 216.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibits 213, 215, and 216 are admitted.
I'm also showing you Exhibit 221. Do you recognize what's within that folder?
Yes, these were the phone records of Logan McQueary and Tammi Smith, the call detail records, in which I added a column with some notations.
And also for Elizabeth Johnson?
What am I missing? Yes, Elizabeth Johnson's as well.
I would move to enter into evidence. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me show you that. I'll move to enter into evidence Exhibit 221 at this time.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 221 is admitted.
Now I want to talk a little bit about Exhibit 221. You indicated that you added a column within these records.
Yes. Those records were delivered to us electronically via email, and they come in an Excel spreadsheet, so it was easy for me to add some data to those files.
Okay. And the data that you added, was that at my request, actually?
It was.
All right. And that was to indicate, with reference to Tammi Smith, Logan McQueary, and Elizabeth Johnson, who was placing calls to whom?
Yes.
All right. Because, as we'll see, these are... This particular set of records are the Verizon phone records. Oh, Your Honor, there are phone numbers on here that
Okay, so we
do not.
need to make sure we don't broadcast this exhibit outside the courtroom.
These are the Verizon phone records of Tammi Smith, correct?
Yes, with the added column that I put in there.
Okay. The previous exhibits with the certifications and the printouts, those are as they were received from the phone company, correct?
Correct.
And this set here in Exhibit 221, you added a notation in this last column
Yes.
labeled L. who the call is from and who it's to.
Yes, those records are unchanged from the certified copies with the exception of the addition of column L, and then whatever typing occurs in that column is italicized to indicate that was added by myself.
Okay, so for example, on this document here, which is labeled page 33 of 49, there's a call placed on December 21st, 2009, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And is this the time that the call is made? Or is that the length of the call?
No, that is the time the call was placed.
All right. And are these records done in military time as well?
Actually, I can't, yes, now that you moved your finger, I can see that.
And so when it says 12:19 and 33 seconds, that's 12:19 p.m., correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, as you go across, there's some data here, and then it indicates in column H, labeled MDN, a phone number that's attributable to Tammi Smith, correct?
Yes,
And what does that column?
the only phone number appearing in that column will be Tammi Smith's.
Okay. And that's how you know these are her records,
Yes.
correct? Then here, where it says called number in column I, what does this column indicate?
Per the instructions that come from Verizon on how to interpret their call detail records, the number appearing in that column, if it's an incoming call, your target number will appear in that column. If it's an outgoing call, the phone number that your target dialed will appear in that column.
Okay. So if somebody's calling Tammi Smith, her number is going to appear in this column.
Correct.
If she's making a call to someone else, then the number that she dialed will be in that column.
Yes.
Okay. So this indicates that this is an incoming call to her?
That in the next column, yes.
Okay.
And actually the direction column tells me it's incoming.
All right. And does this section here, section J, indicate who is calling her?
That's correct.
And that number we know is attributable to Logan McQueary.
If it's an incoming number, the number of the person calling your target will appear there. If your target is making an outgoing call, their number will appear in that column as well.
Okay. So this indicates it's a call from Logan to Tammi.
Yes. And I find that really, this may not be for everybody, but the easiest way to look at these records for Verizon to determine whether it's an incoming call or an outgoing call is to look at the direction column. And there's a two-letter code in there in the line that she was giving. The example of it says MT, and what that means is mobile terminating. And in the cellular phone company world, a terminating call is an incoming call. If it were an outgoing call, it was an originating call. It would say MO. So mobile originating is outgoing. Mobile terminating, because it terminated at your handset, is an incoming.
Okay.
And you'll see there's other lines of data in there, and there's other codes, LL. If there's an LL in that column, that data is useless to the investigation. It's just network. It's extra network, in my opinion, garbage. It's stuff that's not going to help me do anything. It's meaningless.
Okay. And then if we look over, I skipped this earlier, in column K, there's a number indicated here. What does that number mean?
Column K, the SCR at the heading is the seizure, and essentially that is the duration the call lasted in seconds. So you got to do a little math there.
Okay. And so on this particular page, you noted two calls, one from Logan to Tammi on December 21st at 12:19, and then another from Tammi to Logan on the same date at 13:14 or 1:14 p.m.
Yes. And I want to be clear on these records, too. We are talking Arizona time here, too, because this will become confusing later.
All right, because Tammi Smith's phone is located in Arizona, they would use Arizona time.
Yes.
Now, with regard to Elizabeth Johnson's phone numbers,
That's text message data.
okay. And does this indicate the text message usage on this phone that's attributable to Elizabeth Johnson?
That is correct.
And that's from the dates of 12/21/2009 to 12/26/2009?
Yes.
All right. Now, these are different records. These are from Cricket, correct?
These are Cricket, yes.
And there's a different way to read these than the Verizon records.
Yeah, and especially because this is text message data only.
Okay. Now, text message data only, that means that there's no content of the messages, correct?
Right, it's just this number texted this number on this date and time.
All right. And we have here a date, which is the date of the text, correct?
Yes.
A time, is that the time that the text was placed?
Can you move your finger so I can
Sorry.
see? Yeah, and that's in military time as well.
Okay. And then we have an originating address and a destination address. Could you explain what those mean?
Any phone number in the originating address is the call that sent the text, and the destination address is the phone number that received the text.
And you've indicated in a column on here as well who the text is from and who the text is to.
Yes.
Okay, so for example, on 12/22/09, 11:47, there's a text from Elizabeth to Tammy,
Yes.
as well as another one at 11:47,
Yes.
one at 11:49 from Tammy to Elizabeth,
Yes.
one at 7:34 on December 25th, 2009, from Tammy to Elizabeth.
Yes.
Also on December 25th, 2009, one at 7:35 from Elizabeth to Tammy.
Yes.
And then one on December 26th, 2009, from Tammy to Elizabeth.
Yes.
And I believe we looked at this already in relation to the cell phone tower. But this again involves Elizabeth Johnson's phone number, correct?
Yes.
And again, you've indicated on her records who the calls are to and from.
Yes.
And on Elizabeth Johnson's phone records, these are done in San Antonio time, correct?
That is correct, and at the particular time of year this occurred, San Antonio was 1 hour ahead of Arizona.
Now, there are some items in these phone records that are bolded.
Yes,
Okay, and did you add that bolding into these particular records?
I did.
Okay, and why did you do that?
This is where things get a little confusing with Cricket. For some reason, the way Cricket extracts, when we make a request to them for phone records, the way they extract that data from their network, you wind up getting data that pertains to other people's phones as well. And that only pertains to if one Cricket phone makes a call incoming or outgoing to another Cricket phone. Not only am I going to get my target's information, but I'm going to get the information relative to that call from the other Cricket phone as well. So I'm going to have two entries for the same phone call. One is going to be relative to my target number, and the other is going to be relative to the other Cricket customer. What makes it particularly confusing in this case is a lot of these phone calls occurred between Logan and Elizabeth. Logan's in Arizona. Elizabeth is in San Antonio. It's not like I get two lines of data, one after the other, for the same call. They're an hour apart. And that's why I bolded this information. Anything in bold letters indicates, and also if in the customer phone column, you can see that is Logan's phone number. So anything that has been bolded and has Logan's phone number in that customer column, or any other phone number besides Elizabeth's numbers, that particular line of data pertains to that Cricket customer's phone number and is not it's good data in one sense, but it's not the time that call occurred relative to Elizabeth's phone.
All right, so for example, I'm going to try to put these two next to each other. And, this bolded area indicates Logan's phone calls that are made.
Starting on 12/27/2009 at 11:57.
Okay, and those are his records that are inserted into her records.
Yes, and there are some other of Logan's records above that, but there's actually calls there on 12/26/2009 and starting at 12:01 and going to 12:29. Those are Logan records also.
Okay. And those are indicated in Arizona time because that's where Logan's phone is located, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Then we have these lines here that are not bolded, indicating calls from Logan to Elizabeth.
Yes.
Correct? And those are her records in San Antonio time.
Yes, and if you can move the sheet on the left up a little bit. The call on the left side page, which is indicating Logan's records at 11:57 there, the duration column indicates 1 minute 37 seconds. Okay, so that's a line of data in Logan's call detail records. The corresponding call for that I would expect to find at 12:57 in Elizabeth's records because they are an hour ahead. And it's not exactly at 12:57. I wouldn't expect it to be exact the same time. But the duration of the call on Elizabeth's records is 1:23. The duration on Logan's is 1:37. The reason is that is an outgoing call from Logan. I would expect the duration on his call detail records to be longer than Elizabeth's because the minute he hits send on his phone, the clock starts ticking. And it's got to go to the phone service provider and through their switching network, and it finally gets delivered to Elizabeth. When she presses answer, the clock starts ticking for her, and those times will never match up.
Okay. So on this particular line of data at 11:57 for Logan, it's showing up as 12:56:54 for Elizabeth.
Could you repeat that, please? I'm sorry.
For this particular line of data on December 27th, 2009, the call starts for Logan at 11:57, and the duration is 1:37.
Yes.
On Elizabeth's records, it's 12:56:54 for 1 minute and 23 seconds.
Yes.
And that's the same call.
That is the same call.
And just so we're clear, you've indicated whatever's in bold is the other person's phone records that are in there.
Yes.
Okay. And whatever is not bolded in this one, in this record specifically refers to Elizabeth Johnson's calls.
Yes.
Now we have the text messages. And I believe you stated this earlier, but Cricket doesn't provide content of text messages, correct?
No, not all phone service providers retain the content of the text message. They'll retain the data, who texted who, but not the actual message itself.
So as far as Logan McQueary and Elizabeth Johnson's records are concerned, we don't have the availability to obtain the content of the messages from the phone provider.
Correct, we do not.
If we do have content from them, it would be solely from their phones, whatever's left on their phones.
Yeah, if we had possession of their phone and they had a history of text messages in their phone, we would be able to obtain that.
Okay. Now, as far as Verizon records are concerned, however, do they keep the content of text messages as far as their records go?
Yes.
Okay. And is there a time period in which you have to request that information?
Anytime we think that text message content is important to investigation, we would immediately send a preservation letter to that phone provider asking them not to delete any of that information. Typically, if I were to make a request like that today, I might get 3 to 5 days back from today in text message content. Most, maybe 10 days, but typically 3 to 5 days. It's that time sensitive.
Okay, so once 3 to 5 days pass, for the most part, you're not going to get it.
Unless you got possession of the phone that sent the message and they haven't deleted it from their phone, it's gone.
Okay, but in this case, however, we were able to obtain preservation letters to get the content of Tammi Smith's text messages, correct?
Yes, some of them, yes.
Specifically, we have the dates December 24th through the 31st of 2009 and January 1st through 3rd of 2010.
Yes, and I'm sure there was more than one request to cover that date span.
All right, let's explain that a little bit. At the time that you were obtaining those records, it was done under exigent circumstances, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and you can only ask for a certain time period for an exigent request.
Typically, the phone service provider under an exigent request would only provide you 48 hours of records. That's not always the case. And as I recall, particularly in this investigation, because of the nature of what we were investigating, they may have been able to get outside that 48-hour range. And I don't think that's a legal requirement, the 48 hours. I think it's a industry.
Okay. But in any event, we were able to obtain records for that time frame and obtain certification of those records at this time. Okay. Now, the first date that we have is from December 24th, 2009.
Thank you.
And I'm going to have you explain a little bit about the record itself, and then we'll go through and talk about some of the texts that are within these records. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So up here, where it indicates log written, message arrival, final disposition, there's all the date of 12/24/2009, and then there's a time associated with that. Could you explain what that means for the jury?
Well, the log written time, to me, that's just network information that Verizon retains. It indicates that the time that they logged the transaction after everything was complete, or the transmission. The message arrival time, the second line down, indicates that is the time that the text message, the originator of the text message or the sender of the text message push send on their phone. That is the time that message was captured by Verizon Wireless in their switching system. The message, doesn't go directly from one phone to another. It has to go through the network system of Verizon Wireless, and there's switches involved in that route the message to the right location or phone number. So essentially, you can look at it. In this case, all three of those times are the same. That's not always the case. Sometimes that message arrival at the switch will be a few seconds shorter than the final disposition, which the final disposition is essentially the switch has now forwarded that message on to whoever the recipient was intended to be.
And then, as far as deciphering these records go, what
does originator DN, originator MSI, what do these numbers indicate?
Okay, that's how you tell whether this was an incoming or an outgoing text message. And this is still kind of the same principle that we discussed earlier on the cricket records. If it says originator DN, and DN stands for delivery number, I believe it was. I'm not going to go there. Sorry. I can't remember specifically what that means, but originator is the key word there. It's just like it was a call origination, this is a text originator. So that indicates that this was an outgoing text message, and the phone number indicates it was Tammi Smith's phone.
Okay.
The originator MSID, the MSID number in this case is another phone. It looks like a phone number, it's not a phone number. Ironically, I don't know why this is in the cellular world, but your phone is not recognized on whatever phone provider's network you have by your phone number. There's another unique number for your phone embedded in there. Looks just like a phone number.
Actually, Your Honor, relevance, I think we're kind of going on with this. I think we can probably move this forward a bit. See how this is relevant to this case.
They're laying foundation. If you want to stipulate to it all coming in and saying what the state says it is, that's fine. Otherwise, they can lay the foundation that they need to lay it to explain it, so the objection's overruled.
Ms. Phillips is okay with that.
Who's objecting and who's going to object? For one witness, let's have one attorney objecting. So I assume I'm going to be hearing from Mr. Lee continually for this witness if he's going to be objecting, or is it going to be you? If it's going to be you, let's leave it at you.
That's fine, Judge.
We'll withdraw the objection.
Thank you. Continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. So the MSID is another way of identifying a person's phone number with the phone company.
Yes, it's confusing to look at these, but yes, that number is the phone or the number that identifies that phone number on the network.
Okay. And then the terminating MSID, does that indicate who the message is sent to?
It does.
Okay. And in this case, on this particular text, we have a 615 number, but we're not certain of who that is at this time. Or are you able to tell us at this time who's that?
I have a spreadsheet I could look at to see if that appears in there as one of my subscribers, but off the top of my head, I don't know.
Okay. All right. So you did look into who these various individuals were, as far as who the texts or calls were being sent to?
Not based on the text.
Okay. The phone calls.
On phone calls,
Okay.
I identified a great number of subscribers. Not all, but a great number. Whether that happens to be one of them, I don't know.
Okay. All right. So the content of this text, is that indicated down here?
Yes, what is in brackets there is the actual text message that was transmitted.
Okay. And is that the text message that the defendant wrote in this case?
Yes, this was an outgoing text.
Okay. And what is the content of that message?
It reads, "What is Janet's phone number?" ? She knows a good adoption attorney.
Okay. Now, this text message here, in this area here, was on December 26th of 2009?
Yes,
Okay, and it originated with the defendant in this case?
yes,
And it was sent to a phone number associated with Elizabeth Johnson, correct?
yes.
The 210 area code. And what is the content of this text message?
The text message starts out with a phone number.
I don't know why it's...
Do you want me to read that?
You don't have to read the phone.
Okay. Starts out with a phone number, and then after that it states, "This is a number to my friend Janet Morris in TN, period. Call her, exclamation. She can give you all the legal advice you need to know, period. Then call me and we'll talk, exclamation, Tammi."
And that indicates it was sent at about 10:59,
Yes,
and that would be 10:59 a.m. if in military time, that would translate to
Yes, that's right.
10:59.
That would.
Okay. Directing your attention to the first text message on this page, what is the date of that text message?
December 27th, 2009,
And the time?
10:50 a.m.
And who is that from and who is it to?
It is an outgoing text from Tammi Smith's phone to Elizabeth Johnson's phone.
And what is the content of that text message?
Is everything okay? Question mark. I've tried calling you and it keeps disconnecting! Exclamation point.
Okay.
Period.
And
I am upset and scared. Period.
And the next message, the date and time?
December 27th, 12:09.
And who is it to and from?
It's an outgoing text from Tammi to Elizabeth.
And what is the content?
Call me, exclamation point, call me, explanation point. I'm here for you, ...
Now this one spans 2 pages here. I'm directing your attention to this text message right here. What is the date and time of that text?
December 27th, 2009, 12:10 p.m.
And to and from?
It is to Elizabeth from Tammi.
And what is the content?
What's going on now? Question mark has done something. Question mark.
And what is the next text?
The next text occurred on December 27, 2009, 12:23 p.m. It is an outgoing text from Tammi to Elizabeth. It states, please call me, comma, I'm worried about you, exclamation. I have something about my past that I want to tell you, period. We are more alike than you'll ever know, exclamation. Please call me, exclamation.
And the next text?
December 27, 2009, 12:33 p.m. It is incoming to Tammi from Elizabeth, and it states, I hate myself. I can never do anything right, period.
And the next message?
December 27th, 12:35 p.m. It is an outgoing text from Tammi to Elizabeth. It states, yes, you can, ... I was just like you many years ago until I met Jack. He built up my confidence and supported me in whatever I wanted to do, exclamation. He changed my life and...
Okay, does it continue into another text? Or appear to continue into another text?
It appears to, yes.
Okay. And what is the content of that text?
The content of the next text was, we can help you change your life and finally be happy and secure, exclamation. I had a effed up life and thought I was just a piece of shit made by my parents, exclamation. But they don't.
And is that indicating it's from Tammi to Elizabeth?
Yes.
And what is the next message?
Define me anymore, exclamation, and your past doesn't have to define you either, exclamation. Come home and stay with us, exclamation. We'll open a bottle of red wine, and then parenthetically, that's what I drink, into parentheses, and talk, exclamation.
And is that again from the defendant to Elizabeth Johnson?
Yes.
And the next message is that from Elizabeth Johnson to Tammi Smith?
Yes, it is.
And is that on the same date but at a later time of 12:40?
Yes.
And what is the content of that text?
It's too late for me. I'm going to be charged with kidnapping, period. Get a felony, period. And go to jail, period.
Okay. Okay, and does this indicate that Tammy responded to that text?
Yes, it does.
And what is her response?
At 12:40 also, no, you're not, exclamation. Who said that? 3 exclamations.
Okay, and then does Elizabeth respond at 12:41?
Yes.
And what does she say?
It says you are. Lawyer told me that yesterday.
And at 12:41, does the defendant respond to Elizabeth?
Yes.
And what does she say?
My lawyer can shoot, question mark?
And at 12:43, does Elizabeth Johnson respond to the defendant?
Yes.
And what does she say?
I can't come back, period. I won't go to jail. I'd rather die, period. Plus, you could get charged with aiding and abetting, period.
And does this appear to be another response at 12:43 from Elizabeth Johnson to the defendant?
Yes.
And what is the response?
No, the girl one, period.
And at 13:10, which would be 1:10 p.m., does the defendant reply to Elizabeth Johnson?
Yes.
And what does the content of that say?
I just got off the phone with W/my lawyer, Ken. Parenthetically, BTW, comma, that girl isn't an attorney, comma. She just works W/them, end of parentheses. He said, since you never got served, comma, you don't, HV, I believe, have to show tomorrow, but you will.
We're at our afternoon breaking point, so we're going to go ahead and take our afternoon break. So ladies and gentlemen, we'll come back in about 15 minutes. Until then, remember the admonition, and we'll see you in about 15 minutes. Okay, please be seated, everyone. We're outside the presence of the jury. Let's make sure that it's one, we've talked about this, one lawyer per witness. Whoever wants to do it's fine with me, but it needs to be one, and somebody else jumping in with an objection is not appropriate, and we should have had that covered before, so let's not do that. The second thing is, and I'll leave it to you, we're not at a point where I'm going to tell you can't do it, but we're reading the same text we've read before, so I'm not sure, we're reading them again, we've read them again. I don't think there should be a foundational concern that they are what you say they are, if that's why you're reading them, because we've read, I've heard this before.
In Your Honor, the issue is that there's an additional text in there that wasn't in the previous text, and so I need to keep it in context.
Okay.
Otherwise, I would not go over that again.
Okay, all right. I understand. Okay, we're going to take about a 15-minute break, and we'll be back shortly. So the jury, I understand the lawyers wanted to speak with me.
Alicia Shumway indicated that she's had a request from the media to do an interview about her testimony. She wanted instructions. I didn't want to be the one to instruct the rules in place. I don't know if that means that she can't talk to anybody now that she's been released or not.
Technically, I think she can. If there's a chance that she might be recalled, she shouldn't, but she's been essentially released for purposes of the rule, I think. So, I don't know. Ms. Phillips, what do you think?
Defense doesn't have a position, Your Honor.
I won't forego the possibility that she wouldn't be recalled.
Okay. Well, what we need to do in the future, if there's a witness and you think that there's a chance that they may be recalled, and I ask if this witness essentially can be released, you got to tell me subject to recall. So I know now, technically you could recall someone anyway, but if there's a real possibility, let me know. If you're telling me there's a chance that she might be recalled, then I don't want her talking to anyone about her testimony per the rule. So the directive would be not while there's any thought that she might be recalled. You need to tell her not to talk to the media.
Sure, Your Honor, and because we don't know what the defendant's going to say when she testifies, we have no idea who we might need to recall.
I understand that theoretical possibility that's out there. Okay. Anything else we need to talk about before we bring the jury back?
Not from the state, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and get the jury.